Okay. Hello, everybody. Glad you're here. Today, I have the pleasure to interview a friend and a teacher of mine, Rafe Kelley. And Rafe is the founder of Evolve, Move, Play, where he blends a diverse background ranging from martial arts to gymnastic training to parkour, all flavored from the lens of anthropology and evolutionary biology. And Rafe, every time I've studied with him, is just a wealth of knowledge, and I learn a ton every time. And so I'm really stoked to see what I learned this time and excited to hear what he has to share with you. So, Rafe, welcome. How are you?
Thank you very much, Chandler. It's great to be here.
Good, good. So we had a couple of tech issues the first time around, and so we'll circle back around to the preliminary question, but I'm sure you get this all the time. What exactly is Evolve, Move, Play? They're words that we don't often see kind of woven together, and you've got a really interesting take on these. So I'm curious, what's that all about?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I've gone off to do my own little idea of what movement is, but the basic idea I like to think is that I'm trying to teach people how to move like a human being. And you might say, well, of course we move like human beings, but the idea is that a human being is an evolved creature. It has a nature, and there's a way of moving that's going to best facilitate that nature so that you can have the greatest health, the greatest performance, the greatest connection and an embodiment and kind of most meaningful practice in your life. And the way that I like to think about it is we evolved to move. We didn't evolve for sedentary lives, and that's one of the biggest problems that we face. And we evolved to be motivated to move and to develop movement primarily through play. And it's a huge thing that we misunderstand about a physical culture right now. Play is the most powerful motivational system to get people started moving. And it's actually the best guide to the movement that has been relevant to human beings throughout our evolution. So we play in species-specific ways because those things were important for our survival. Basically, if evolution bothered to create a pleasurable sensation in your brain for doing a specific activity, it's probably really important for your body and for your psyche as well, and for your social function. So things like rough and tumble play, things like climbing trees, things like running and jumping and climbing rocks and dancing. Those are things that are probably way more relevant towards the broad spectrum development of a human being than something like running on a treadmill or lifting weights, which they certainly have their place, but they're fundamentally not very motivational to humans. And that probably means that they're actually less broadly nutritious for a human being.
Interesting. Now, I know I experienced this when I first went to a seminar. A lot of the things that we lump into this idea of intrinsically human movements, things that are fun, things that are playful, can often be terrifying too. And I'm curious, because I know you talk a lot about like how to deal with fear, how to deal with just the psychological component of a movement practice too.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the strategies that you use to kind of break down something like leaping from a tree branch to a tree branch, or tackling a big jump, breaking the jump?
Yeah, I want to answer that question. I want to go back because I feel like there's another question in there that wasn't that seems important, which is the question of like, is fear fun, or why do we do things like if it's all about fun and it's all about play, like why do things that are scary and hard anyways? Mm-hmm. One of my teachers and someone I really respect is Shiri Aziv, and we were training, and she said something that really struck me. She said, it doesn't have to be fun to be play. And we think of play as like maybe that feeling we remember as a kid when we're running around and we're like giggling and everything's like that peak state. But kids play is actually really serious in a lot of ways. It's about going out and confronting yourself and stretching your edges. So you'll see kids, you know, climbing up the big toy, and they're looking and wanting to jump down, and it's part of their play, right? They're not doing it because anybody told them to. They're not doing it because they're supposed to. They're doing it because something in them is called to challenge themselves. And the experience of that can be frustrating, it can be frightening, it can be all sorts of different emotional hues. So it's not as simple as like, you just seek a thing that's fun or just have that laughing, giggling experience all the time. the play can be a very intense thing, and it can be a really powerful thing. And one of the things that you're doing with it is you're intentionally seeking out fear. You're intentionally seeking out challenge, because we know that's what helps us grow. And we know that the practice is a laboratory in which we can confront things that are going to occur in our life. We're going to experience fear. We're going to experience frustration. We're going to experience failure. And having a place where we can go and feel safe to experience those things and look really deeply at those things is incredibly powerful. Mm-hmm. So once we've kind of established that, there's something that we learn through that. I came up through the parkour community. That's my biggest influence in a lot of ways. I started training martial arts when I was 6 years old, and I did gymnastics teaching for years. But my biggest kind of root of what I do is the parkour community. And when we first saw parkour, we saw all these guys jumping from rooftop to rooftop. And then we realized that like 90+% of the parkour practice is done on the ground. And then there was a question like, should we even be on the rooftops at all? Should we ever go at height? And a lot of people were kind of like, no, like don't ever do that. It's stupid. It's not worth the risk. And I really didn't do a lot of training at height for many years in my practice. I was, when it was rooftops, I didn't want to get the community in trouble because I was a leader of the parkour community. Mm-hmm. So it was actually when I started Evolve Move Play that I did more exploration of heights. And so now I fairly regularly jump at 20 or more feet off the ground between tree branches. And it's really something that you have to think about. Like, why would you do that? I have three small children at home. I have a 5.5-year-old daughter and a 3.5-year-old son and a 3-month-old right now. Mm-hmm. So I don't feel like I take risk, right? I'm very, very careful about the way that I do these things. And I do them for a very specific reason. But if I don't have a reason, and if it's not deeply important to me, then I shouldn't do it. So I have to answer this question of why it's important. And that the answer is that it's real. It's skin in the game, right?
Yeah.
Like parkour athletes in some sense, parkour athletes and like MMA fighters, they have more skin in the game than anybody else. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, the parkour athletes have more skin in the game even than the MMA fighters because the MMA fighter has a referee in there between them and the potential of death, right? If they're in deep trouble, someone's going to jump in and take them out of that situation. But when you're looking at and I guess this is true of extreme sports too. Like you could say skiing and snowboarders and kayakers, they're all in this place of like, putting their life on the line in order to experience something. And that may seem, reckless. It may seem like there couldn't possibly be anything worth doing that for. But there's something about that forces you to confront who you really are in a way that nothing else can. So in order to understand how you make decisions, in order to understand how to go through the process of taking risk, in order to become the type of person who can overcome something really difficult, there's something that is profound that's learned by these practices. And that's why I do it. I don't do it thoughtlessly. I don't do it because it looks good on video. I don't do it for any of those reasons, right? Mm-hmm. I do it because I construct a version of myself that I feel like is more competent, is more capable, is a better father, is a better husband through confronting my demons by facing fear. So when we do that, you have to be honest with yourself. That's really fundamental. Mm-hmm. And that's maybe one of the most powerful things about it is it's skin in the game on honesty, right? If you lie to yourself about a jump that's 20 feet off the ground, like that's the last lie you tell yourself. Right?
Yeah.
And that's that's important, right? And you need to know yourself well before you get there, before you're at the 25 feet off the ground. You don't want to make a mistake there. I I feel bad because I always tell somebody else's story when I talk about this. But one of my big influences in thinking about fear in relationship to the parkour game, and one of my good friends is Dylan Baker, who's a parkour athlete from Colorado, and he tried to do a conga precision between two buildings, and his hand slid out. And so, normally not a conga precision, a conga cat, but normally when you do a conga cat, your feet hit first, and then you settle into your hands. So he clipped his feet. So he was flying head first at another building, basically like 150 feet off the ground. And he caught by the skin of his fingers, basically. And he smashed his feet into the wall, and he broke his toe. And he ended up hanging by basically like this many fingers. And he still does this stuff, right? Maybe one of the best in the world at dealing with these type of fears and overcoming these things. And he's really got a lot of insight about it. And so I was talking to him about it, and he was saying, the reason that he fell that day is because he asked somebody else to film it. And because they were there, he felt like he had to do it for them. And it wasn't for him. And my other friend, Stefan Vigru, who he kind of developed the steps of breaking the jump that we'll talk about in a second. He had a similar experience. He was on a Nike commercial shoot. It was one of the first parkour commercial shoots in history. And he was doing a very large Kong drop over a gap. And he had done it, and he felt like he didn't do it as well as he wanted. He was very tired and fatigued from a lot of things. And his body told him, like, no, it's not the right time to do it. But he forced himself through it, and he tore up his knee. And he was out of the game for a long time due to that. And so I was talking to him recently about this on my podcast. And we're talking about, you have to be aligned with yourself. You need to know that you're doing it for you, and that there's a sense of connection. So that's the fundamental. As you do it, like he talks about, when you look at a jump, the first thing is you need to feel called to the jump. Like the jump has to feel like it's meaningful to you. Right? The second thing is you need to assess the jump. So I'll give you an example. Recently I did a jump. It's about 25 feet up in a tree. And it's probably about a 6-foot drop and maybe 6 to 7 feet wide. And the branch is about as thick as my forearm. So, well, maybe my upper arm. So but it's not real thick. It's, it's not like, there's tons of space.
Yeah.
The nice thing is that you can bounce forward and put your hands on something. But you have to be precise with your feet. So I was training there a few weeks ago, and it was actually snowing that day, just a little bit. And my friend Bergen did this jump, and it kind of blew my mind. I never looked at it, never thought it was possible. And right away, my competitive instinct kicked in, and I wanted to do it. And I went up and looked at it, and I just didn't feel it at all. It was just not for me that day. Like I knew that I was capable of the jump, but my mind was not connected to it. It wasn't my jump that day. It was his jump. So then a few weeks later, I came back to it, and I locked onto it when I got there. It was like my eyes couldn't stop looking at that jump. I wanted that jump. It was the day to do that jump. So then I got up, and the first thing I did is I went and stood in the jump, not with an intention of jumping, but just an intention of rehearsing and getting aware of it. So that's the second step, which is the assessing of the jump. So you need to make sure when you look at a jump, is it going to fail, right? So the question I was asking myself, I was like, okay, I'm a lot bigger than my buddy Bergen. it took his weight. Will it take my weight?
Mm-hmm.
Because if that branch breaks, it's a bad day. So I went over and like stood on the branch and pushed up and down on it. I was like, okay, it feels really solid. And I took a good look at it. And then this particular jump, the tree trunk is sort of hanging over it a little bit. So it's kind of like, you're kind of crowded. And then there's some other trees that are sort of creeping in, and there's just all this, just this noise, really. It's noise around it. And you have to kind of eliminate all of that. You have to get rid of it. So as you're assessing that jump, and you get to the point where you're really thinking about the ability to jump, and you look at it, and you're not looking at it anymore as like, can this jump be done, or will this get in the way anymore? You're thinking, I can do this jump. Am I going to do it right now? Mm. And when you get to that stage, then the like ball shrinking terror starts. Right? That's when you feel the fear. So it's like, see the jump. Is this jump for you? 2, assess it. Make sure that it's safe. Make sure that you've understood everything about it that needs to be understood. And then it's like, when you're close to making a decision, then fear is going to come and visit you. And then the next step is, how do you process that fear? How do you overcome fear? So I think I've identified what I think of as the 3 enemies of fear. The 3 enemies of fear are joy, anger, and serenity.
Okay.
So when you're in a really playful state, fear doesn't really have a place to enter. And it's neurologically like the 2 things don't go together. Second is anger. Anger is actually really specifically an emotion that helps you overcome fear. The problem with anger, as far as like doing jumps at height, is that anger adrenalizes you, and it decreases your fine motor coordination, and it kind of manipulates your rationality. Yeah. If you rely on your anger too much, then you're in a place where you start making decisions that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise make, or your decision-making process is broken down. So I use anger as a tool to break jumps on the ground, but I don't use anger as a tool to break jumps at height. It's not safe. And then the last one is serenity, right? Is being calm. So if you look at like novice parkour athletes, or sometimes athletes who come from a community that's less developed, you'll see them kind of screaming and hyping themselves up and slapping themselves and like saying, "No, you got it, bro! Like, just do it, just do it."
Yeah.
And like anybody who's really good and experienced sees that and just kind of cringes, honestly. You know that when someone's in that state, the jump is going to look horrific. And it's just going to be done poorly. It's going to be done in a way that's likely to lead them to injury. You just can't control yourself well when you're in that state. So you'll see almost all the top parkour guys do when they're preparing is they're going to take a couple deep breaths and they're going to shake. And that's just classic calming behavior. It's just about bringing your system into it. So lately, on some of the biggest ones that I've been doing, I've been thinking 5 deep breaths, just 5 deep breaths. And the last breath is my commitment to go. And so I breathe out really slow. Give myself time to lock in and to feel if I'm ready. So what you want to avoid is kind of getting to the edge of doing the jump repeatedly and not doing it. Because you're actually entraining the behavior of not doing it. You're teaching yourself not to do it.
Yeah.
So you want to kind of not commit to doing the jump until you're really ready. And then once you commit, you need to do it. And so that's the next step is once you have a way through the fear, the next step is you have to make a decision. I'm going to jump or I'm not going to jump. And once you make a decision, you have to be true to your decision, right? The worst things happen when you try to act and try to change your decision in the middle of it. And then the last thing is you do it. And one of the really interesting things about doing these things in my experience is that if you're in the right mental state, it's as if the jump has already happened at a certain point. It's like the energy locks on. I literally feel like when I was doing this jump most recently, there's all these tree branches and everything. There's all this distance underneath me, and it all sort of just gets fuzzy, and the branch itself gets crystal clear in my vision. It's like I get a little bit of tunnel vision. It's just like a camera locking on to that. Yeah. And when I feel that sense of locked on and my attention doesn't want to divert away, my attention wants to stay on that. My attention is there. And then there's the sense of your attention is just fully focused on this thing. And it's like a window has opened through which you can pass. And then you want to pass through it. And if you wait too long, if you hesitate in that moment, it's so much harder afterwards. And you'll feel it. It's like the window shuts. And I describe it as the biggest energetic cock block you've ever experienced. Bam! All this positive energy you've been building up and building up and building up just sort of turns from positive to negative and just smashes you. And it's no fun. So you want to avoid that.
It's no fun. Yeah. Yeah.
So then you, once you're in that state and the window is open, you have to act. You act and you do it. And that place of being serene and having this sort of this sense that the thing has already happened and it's just the thing moving through you. That's the safe place in which to do extremely high danger things.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of talk.
That's a lot of talk, but it's good. And so I'm particularly intrigued by that there are multiple things I'm intrigued by, but particularly that last bit where you said, like, basically where you're landing is the only thing that you see. Everything else gets a little fuzzy. And I'm so curious because I know in a lot of your work, you bring in like task-oriented kind of movement, and that actually does influence our perception to a degree. So I'm wondering if you could maybe expand on that a little bit.
So I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction, but this is what's interesting to me at the moment. We've both been really influenced by the work of Jordan Peterson over the last little bit. And one of the things he talks about a lot is that reality is very, very complicated, and there's a lot of it, and there's very little of you. And there's very little of your ability to pay attention to things. Mm-hmm. So in order to act effectively in the world, what you have to be able to do is attend to the most important things and make a lot of the rest of the world irrelevant. So when you're looking at a really big and scary jump, you can't do it until you can focus enough attention on it. Mm-hmm. And the only way you can focus enough attention on it is to make everything else irrelevant. And all these things are really interrelated. There's you might think that a jump is primarily something that happens in your muscles, but you can't jump if you can't perceptually resolve the thing that you want to jump to. And you can't jump unless you can emotionally align yourself with the jump and psychologically align yourself. So all these things are like working on the same level, and they're connected. It's like the perceptual system, the way that you see the world, that's through like a model in your brain that tells your perceptual system how to organize. Mm-hmm. And then when there's congruence between the perceptual system and the model in your brain, then the physiological system is uninhibited and allowed to act. Mm. So we have to, this is something that I think, this is a big interest of mine right now, that I think people really don't recognize how much of being able to act effectively in movement arts is about how accurately you can perceive things and how rapidly you can shift your attention and how well you're able to prioritize where your attention is directed. And a lot of that is practice, right? You practice and practice and practice, and over time your brain gets better at perceiving what's relevant in the situations that you practice. Mm-hmm. But there's also ways to practice that are better at feeding that information into the brain and at eliminating the information that's not helping you. That's one of the biggest problems, is people don't recognize that coaches can actually really coaching yourself can be a massive inhibitor of your movement performance, because it's feeding you information and asking you to pay attention to things that are not relevant to what you're trying to do.
Ah, interesting.
So if I'm developing habits of attention in the athlete that's not relevant to the things that they need to do, I'm actually diverting the resources that they need when they need it. And so if you look at like Franz Bosch's work, he talks about the idea of reinvestment, which is if you give an athlete a lot of things to think about in execution of a skill, when that skill is under high pressure, it'll basically kind of break apart into pieces, and the athlete has to then try and control all those pieces again in order to operate the skill. And then you, like Nick Winkelman has talked about this, and Franz Bosch has talked about the idea that this is one of the big reasons that athletes choke, right? Is that under high pressure, a kind of very cognitively complex model of a skill will erode when the stress levels are high enough. So I don't know if I answered your question. I went all over the place there.
That's a good one, though. Yeah. So there was a part of that I wanted to pick out a little bit, and something reminded me of a past conversation we'd had about, movement culture as kind of the general phenomenon.
Yeah.
And of course, in a lot of these images we see, videos we see, it's almost a practice devoid of context in a way.
Yeah.
Flat floors, flat walls, isolated movements that have been strung together in an improvisation of sorts. But if we circle back to what you said at the very start, it seems like there's a deficit of potential movement nutrition in that kind of setting, right?
Yeah. I don't think I've said this on a podcast before, so I'm going to get controversial here for a second. But I've described MoveNat as parkour without flow combined with CrossFit without intensity.
Okay.
The idea is that, the movements are largely comparable to the movements in parkour. From what I know about the background and development of MoveNat, having worked with Erwin on it, there was actually, he did train with the parkour community. So a lot of those movements he probably learned through parkour. He learned them from George Hebert's books, and I don't know the whole story. So, don't take my word for that. But that's my perception, is that a lot of it looks like the way that we were training parkour 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It's the same skills. And then the MoveNat combo idea is directly taken from CrossFit. It's circuit training. But the thing about parkour that makes it really powerful from a neurological and learning standpoint is the connections between skills. So you can practice a broad jump 10 times, and you can practice a leg hook climb up 10 times. But what you're actually doing is you're decreasing the connection between those skills. And so you're decreasing the challenge that the nervous system has in organizing the skills. So you're making it a less proprioceptively rich and a less coordination rich environment than practicing broad jump to climb up, broad jump to climb up, broad jump to climb up. Every time you have to do the transition, that's harder. It's more complex. It's more difficult. Your brain has to organize those two skills more. And then at the same time, the combos are generally done without the pressure of time, which is what gives CrossFit the intensity that makes it so effective in building up athletes, at least, at a certain level that's very effective for certain purposes. So then there's some things that I really like about movement culture. And I think that what we see from the Instagram movement culture is probably not a fair representation of what's being done by Ido Portal and his students. So people should separate what I'm about to say as what I see in Instagram movement culture, and not what is, what may actually be happening behind the scenes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I see in Instagram movement culture looks like people training the skills of a fighter without ever being able to fight, the skills of a dancer without moving the music, right? And the skills of the strength skills of a gymnast without doing gymnastics. Like it's a lot of pieces, or it's capoeira actually. Sorry, the locomotion stuff is mostly derived from capoeira. Obviously, they've taken stuff from dance and other communities, but capoeira is the fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
So you've taken the motor skills of capoeira, and divorced it from the game.
Mm-hmm.
And the game of capoeira is incredibly rich and sophisticated and has all of these values. And so what I worry is happening is that there's this idea that you can create this generalist mover, but what you're ending up with is just a bunch of pieces from various other arts that might not be the most valuable pieces, and that there's nothing that really deeply connects them and makes it a really rich thing in itself. Like, would you rather be someone who has the good movement potential of a boxer but can't box, and the explosive ability of a parkour athlete but can't do parkour, and the flowiness of a dancer but can't dance? Or would you rather be somebody who can box and do parkour and dance, right? And would you be a more effective person in the world if you could do those things well, even if you weren't a good mover? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if my buddy Amos Rendau from Apex Movement, he's kind of stiff. He's not super strong naturally. He's not going to do any, straddle planges. He can't do tons of muscle ups. His deadlift isn't over 350 pounds or anything like that. He's a strong, he's a good athlete. He's not a bad athlete. He's just not an exceptionally strong or powerful athlete. And he's pretty stiff. He doesn't have a perfect deep squat. He doesn't have perfect overhead flexibility. But he's probably one of the most effective parkour athletes that you could find. And if
he can move,
he can move. Yeah, if it's like if you had one guy he wanted to like drop into a nightclub and get in a fight with the bouncer and run away and get away like through a complex situation, like he's one of the best at that, because he actually does that. Like he has this whole idea of parkour randori where like he just puts himself in random stupid dangerous situations and runs away. So he can do it. He can do that for real. He's a good dancer. He trains hip hop dance, right? And he's done years and years of martial arts. So it's like, okay, well, do I want to be a good mover, or do I want to be able to do things with my movement?
Yeah. That, it reminds me of something I heard you say in a video at one point, or perhaps it was a post, but you were talking about the whole idea of like self-esteem, and we need to get more self-esteem. And you took an interesting spin and said, well, maybe you just need to develop a self-worth esteeming, right? Like it's not just some magical gift you are given. It's something that you cultivate in yourself through this potentially pretty rigorous practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think self-esteem is mostly a red herring. Like I think there are some people who temperamentally are like high in neuroticism, who might really just need someone who can coach them to love themselves. So I don't think that that's not true at all. But I think for most people it's a red herring, and I think that shows up in the fact that we've had like 3 generations who are raised on the idea of self-esteem, but rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide are all going up. I don't think that telling people to love themselves no matter what they are is a very empowering message, actually. I think it's hollow for people. And I think that what really gives a person a sense of self-worth is having a broad set of things that they can feel confident in, that they can feel like they're competent at, that they can feel like they can have value to their community doing. I think competency and the ability to give back value to your community are huge things that give confidence, and that's fundamental to self-esteem. And I think that the idea that I think the self-esteem idea is also sort of built on this idea that people are intrinsically good. It's like it's Rousseau's idea of the noble savage. And if we just can let go of all the cultural baggage that makes us not accept ourselves, then the perfect, essence of goodness that is inside all of us will magically manifest, and we'll have, utopia. And I think I don't think that's actually an empowering message. I think that it's a message that deludes people and puts people in danger. When there's real malevolence in the world, and there's real malevolence in individuals, right? You can go around being a good person all day, but have motivations and have desires to do terrible things. And you can ignore those and not know that they're there. But you might find yourself doing something terrible someday and be utterly wrecked by it. Or you might have something terrible done to you and be utterly wrecked by it because you have been unwilling to recognize that that's a real thing. Jordan Peterson recommends a book called There's No Such Thing as Dragons. And I picked it up. It's a kid's book. And I picked it up and I've been reading it to my kids and I love it. And the story is basically that that a little boy wakes up one day and he has a dragon in his room. And he goes down and says, "Mom, I'm going to check out this dragon." She says, "There's no such thing as dragons." And so the dragon starts eating all of his food and starts growing and getting bigger. And his mom keeps denying that the dragon's there. And every time she denies the dragon, basically, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it eventually runs away with the house. Nothing's fixed until his dad comes home and says, "What caused this?" and the boy says, "Okay, well, there's a dragon." And the idea there is that we can't, that problems only grow when we fail to see them. And so there's a real desire to shield yourself from the harshness of the world and to shield the people you love from the harshness of the world. But it's not like the harshness of the world goes away just because we don't look at it, or just because we're able to protect ourselves from it. And so I think that's a big part of what parkour is and what martial arts is it's like face the fact that you're fearful, face the fact that you're weak, face the fact that you might get angry, face the fact that you have all these powerful emotions that can drive you to do things that you wouldn't necessarily want to do. And learn to integrate a self that can navigate through these things in a positive way. So fundamentally, I think that what movement is about self-cultivation. And self-cultivation that ignores the fact that you have the capacity for evil, the capacity for weakness, the capacity for blindness to yourself, the capacity to lie. That's not real self-cultivation. Another quote that I get via Peterson, but from Jung that I really like is, you basically, no tree can reach to heaven whose roots don't reach to hell. Like the path to enlightenment is to be able to wrestle with the darkest aspects of the self. And I think that we're failing to articulate that. We're failing to help people deal with those aspects of themselves. And I think that movement practice is actually an extraordinarily powerful place to recognize that.
Yeah. Another thing that I've heard from Jordan Peterson related to there are no such thing as dragons is like, look, if there's something you're afraid of or something that's malevolent, like you need to articulate it. You need to map out the territory of that. Exactly. And it seems like, well, God, a movement practice is the fundamental way of articulation and mapping. Like that's how you anchor yourself in a world.
Yeah, that's why I think that in this I think that, to me, the the philosophy that, as articulated by Jordan Peterson, is almost the same. It's virtually identical to what was emergently developed by the parkour community. Right there's the action end of it and the articulation end of it, and I think there's two fundamental ways to articulate yourself. One is the power of speech, and the other is the power of action. And those are the two fundamental characteristics of the heroic individual: the capacity to act in the world and the capacity to articulate and speak. And speech is action. Speech is movement, right? And we're mapping out that world. So if you go back to the story of the jump that I did, what I was doing was mapping the territory and articulating all of it. And fundamentally, like, that's a big part of what makes parkour really engaging and exciting, is you're triggering all the neurology of an animal discovering its territory.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Like, when you first go to a new spot in parkour, you're not capable of doing your best movement. You're not going to go there right away and be able to jump and flip and do crazy stuff, because you haven't mapped it. You don't recognize the potentials in the environment, both positive and negative, yet. So you look at this space and you have all these potentials, right? And you have to start moving through it, and you have to start physically touching it, and you have to start engaging your visual and other perceptual systems in order to map it and to create a representation of it in your brain. And as that representation is refined, then the inhibitory systems are going to be shut down, and all of a sudden all this potential for movement is going to come out. And then when you do that over and over again across many different spaces, you're continually sending this message to your brain that says, I've mapped my space well. I know where the dangers are, and I'm competent, and I can have potential, and I can let go of my inhibitions.
But it seems like engaging within these novel environments or natural environments or whatever adjective environments we want to think of, that actually helps you kind of refine the sense of yourself, like your self-image.
Exactly. Yeah. Another Peterson quote, he's talking about rough and tumble play. He's saying that, when you meet kids who haven't engaged in a lot of rough and tumble play, it's like their body, it's like they're vague. Their representation of their body is not like, it's not well developed in their brain. And I've had the exact same experience. Like, I've been a mentor for kids from a very young age, roughhousing with kids. And you can see the kids who like have been touched really a lot, and have been moved and have been kind of like engaged in some sort of robust learning process with their body, and they move differently. And the kids who don't, like, they're so lost in their connection to their body. They're so disembodied. You had a conversation with my friend Mark Walsh recently. We're talking about this embodiment thing. It's a big thing. And I'll give you an example of that. One of my students, when I was at Parkour Visions, he was 13 years old, I think, and he was basically completely sedentary. He'd never really engaged in any kind of physical practice in his life. And he turned his ankle over during a class. And the next day he was walking, so it wasn't like a severe ankle injury, but he had a minor ankle injury. But ankle sprains hurt, but he'd never experienced pain like that in his life. And he actually went into shock. So he went into psychological shock. He benched white. He started, having tunnel vision. We had to sit him down and go through all of the kind of stages of helping someone recover from psychological shock. So the crazy thing to think about this is that if this kid hadn't had competent people around him, if he'd been like walking in the woods and sprained his ankle, he might have died because his body didn't know how to resolve how serious of an injury an ankle sprain is. That's how disembodied our culture has become. That's how disconnected from our bodies is, and that's the type of consequence that has when you're completely disembodied, when you're unable to resolve whether a minor ankle sprain is something that'll heal tomorrow or the end of your life.
uh,
Of course people are anxious. Of course people are depressed, right?
yeah.
Because the entire world is incredibly threatening to them because they don't have anything that's teaching them that they're strong.
It's we're just comically fragile, but tragically so. It's
precisely, yeah. My other favorite philosopher these days is Nassim Taleb, right? Antifragility. We are creating more and more fragile human beings by protecting them more. One of the fundamental insights of his book, Antifragile, is that you develop antifragility by being exposed to failure. In a system where you take away all the failure, what you get is an extraordinarily high propensity for catastrophic failure. So a kid who falls down a lot is a kid who's going to be okay even when a big fall. But a kid who never falls down can be severely injured by even a minor fall.
Yeah.
And so we protect our children, we protect ourselves. Our whole society is built on sort of minimizing every sort of little slight that the body or mind might have. Right? We're trying to construct safe spaces, both psychologically and physically, for everything that we experience. And what we're doing is we're creating people who when they're exposed to stress can only respond as if it's a catastrophe.
Well, as you said, it doesn't go away just because you cover your eyes and ears. It's there, and shit will hit the fan at a certain point. And it's just, are you ready?
Are you ready? And that's why strangely it is worthwhile to jump at height because in some sense it's like you just don't know who you are until you've exposed yourself to something. And it doesn't have to be that, like what's fearful for me and what is a worthwhile kind of exploration of that's going to look different from the next person. Because I'm me. I'm a unique individual and somebody else isn't, right? It's not the size of the jump. It's not how high you jump. It's what it teaches you internally. But you have to go far enough to learn the lessons that you need. And, today I was training with my main apprentice here in Seattle. And he had some financial trouble. So he had to do some full-time arborist work. So he's up in trees doing tree work. And so he wasn't able to train with me regularly for about 9 months. So he's just back to training with me regularly. And so it was exciting because most of my training partners right now are just parkour guys for the last little while. But he does the parkour stuff with me, the natural movement stuff, and the martial arts as well. So we got back to training martial arts. And, we put on helmets and we put on, like boxing helmets. And then we boxed bare fist. No gloves, because you need to learn how to throw your hand at somebody in a safe way. And the glove teaches you incorrect mechanics. It teaches you a lot of things. So the first, this is kind of a tangent, but boxing gloves or MMA gloves, they don't protect people's heads. They protect your hand from getting broken. Putting on a helmet, there's some problems with the helmets, like in other ways, but it does protect your head, and it also protects the hand. Because if I bounce my knuckles off the top of your forehead, and there's 2 inches of foam between my hand and your forehead, like that's going to protect my knuckles. But I'll feel it more, and I'll know that I don't want to hit that part of your head better. I have the feedback of my hand and I have the feedback of the glove. Again, we're trying to experience some reality. What is that like? How do you do that? And martial arts is a really interesting kind of place to think about bullshit. Because I think that especially men and especially some men are very motivated to have a sense of themselves as somebody who could take care of themselves in a fight. but it's very easy to want to avoid actual fights because actual fights are dangerous and painful and potentially humiliating. And so it appears to be the case that selling people the idea that they could fight without ever letting them get anywhere near fighting was an extremely effective business model, at least until MMA developed. And so there's these huge traditions and basically bullshit where people are playing with patterns that they just never pressure test. They never experience what the reality is like. So you can do things at 30% speed that you can't do at 100% speed. And you can, if you have a compliant opponent, you can do magic, man. You can do ridiculous stuff, right? Like, I was demonstrating with Robert at a most recent seminar, and I was demonstrating some certain concepts, but we fell into that role of I was the instructor and he was the uke, the receiver of the technique. And I look like a freaking, just
superhuman.
But man, if he was really fighting back, it doesn't look like that at all, right? All of a sudden it's like, okay, this principle that I'm playing with that looks so beautiful right now. It's like, it's successful sometimes, not all the time, and other things happen, and it has to be adjusted. But it's so easy to fall into that delusion with that. So we were stick fighting too. We had our helmets on, and we had some padded rattan sticks, basically. Not rattan, they're like PVC pipe underneath. But we were stick fighting, and afterwards, one of our friends came to train with us, and they were doing some traditional stick drills. There's patterns, and I was like, oh, like a lot of people just spend a lot of time on those patterns. I was like, man, just pick the sticks up and hit each other, right? Like test it for real. That pattern isn't going to happen. You can go back and use the patterns to cultivate specific things and awarenesses, but if you never get to the point where you're like trying to hit someone who's trying to hit you back, the cool thing about the sticks is like with those sticks and with the helmets on, it's like we can wail on each other really hard. And you're learning what it feels like, what it's like to have things flying at you. You're not necessarily learning what it's like for it to hurt as much as it's going to hurt. You're not learning what it's like to have the impact of a heavier weapon and like how that disturbs your balance, or so there's always things that you're not learning anytime that you make it safe. But that confrontation with reality, it's like it changes your whole perception. It's like I don't have this need to prove myself in a fight because I have training partners who punch me in the face regularly.
You've had your fill. Yeah.
It's not even my fill. It's just like I know that no amount of martial arts training is going to make me invincible. Right? Yeah. Like, I know that if it's 5 guys against me, it's going to be really, really difficult. I know that that if someone's just a way better athlete than me and way bigger than me, it's going to be very difficult. Like I might, I have some chances. I've got some things in my toolkit that I can use that might work even in that situation. But the fact that they're that much bigger and that much stronger and that much faster, like really adds up quickly. And I know that even against someone who I should totally outmatch, like there's the chance that something goes bad. There's a chance that I just slip and fall down. Right? But I also know that I have a good chance to defend myself against most people. And so there's a humility. There's a combination of confidence and humility that comes with mapping the territory well enough. I just trained, every day I was like, with compliant, students, and I was just kicking their ass all the time. You can totally buy into this idea that like, oh yeah, and you do that, I'm just going to do this, and this, and I'm going to break 80 ribs and, crush all 5 of your kidneys.
I'm not gonna leave one uncrushed. Damn it.
So anyways, that's kind of a tangent, but it's sort of about this idea of, is your training, is it touching on anything real? Is it cultivating? Yeah, that was the idea I wanted to go with there. Sorry, I'm thinking is very tangential today, but humility plus confidence. It's kind of a weird idea, but if you map something really well, what you're going to know is there's a lot of it that's overwhelming to me, but there's also way more of it that I can handle than I might have ever known if I didn't map it. So the vast majority of obstacles in the world, in some sense, are still way too big for me. Right? Like I can jump a 15-foot gap, but I can't jump a 17-foot gap or an 18 or a 19 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 or 70. You can go on infinitum. Like, like there's way more stuff that I cannot jump between than there is stuff that I can jump between.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's a humility there, but I know what I can do. And so there's confidence there. And that is fundamentally what I think is the best place for your character to be, is having a profound knowledge of all the ways in which you're insufficient, but having the confidence of being much more sufficient than you ever thought you could be. Like the cool thing about starting any movement practice really is that you always suck in the beginning. And then you get to not suck. And every time you go from terrible to decent, you teach yourself that you're the type of person who can do that you have that strength of character within you, that you have the capacity to grow. And it's that can carry you through. It's that I think is a really important source of self-worth.
Mm-hmm. Oh God, yeah. So far we've kept it pretty high level, and I'm sure there are some people who really dig that, and I'm sure there are some people who are curious, just how do you go about anchoring a practice like this? I mean, we talked at the start about the movements that are inherently human, intrinsically human. For someone who is, totally new to this, fresh off the yoga mat or whatever the case may be, like,
break free of the yoga mat.
Yeah, where do you start? I mean, shoot.
I wrote this throwaway post the other day on Facebook. What I kind of liked it was like, there's 5 F's of movement practice, right? Flight, fight, funk, like dance, freak, like in bed, and function, like be able to do things with your body and move things around, right? So like flight, parkour, right? Fight, MMA, self-defense training. Dance, take a dance class, take any dance class, doesn't really matter. Hip-hop's great, modern's great, contemporary's great. Ballet is incredible. It's really hard on your body, but you'll learn some really amazing things from it. Freak, well, I'm not really going to teach you about that, but there are teachers who teach you about that.
There are some smart people.
Like, I'll just recommend a book called A Woman's Guide to Anatomy of Arousal or something by Sherry Winston. Anybody who is a woman who has sex with women should read that book.
Okay.
That's a good resource on that. But, it's like, that's a thing you can actually become more competent at. And being more competent at that will be better for your life. Right?
Reap some rewards.
Yeah, it's rewarding. And then the last one, it's like, jumping between things is fun and flipping off things is fun, but like you should still be able to help your neighbor move their couch. Like pick something heavy up now and then, and also like playing games with balls and objects and sticks is a huge aspect of play across like every culture that we look at. Human beings we have a superpower, right? We think of ourselves as kind of weak animals. We've got thin skin. We don't have big teeth. We don't have claws. We don't run that fast. We're not nearly as strong as a gorilla, but no other animal can throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. Like nothing comes even close to it.
Yeah.
Like I think chimps are like 30 miles an hour and they can't aim at something that's moving. right? So human beings can throw far harder than anything else, and they can throw far more accurately than anything else. So throwing is a huge part of the human movement adaptation. The other aspect of it is reaching and catching things. That's a huge aspect of what we are, because we're predatory animals, and also we're fruit-eating animals that lived in
Mm-hmm.
trees. So the perceptual systems coordination with the hands and the feet is hugely developmental for the brain, and it's a huge thing that's intriguing as a form of play all over the world. So a lot of times we do a lot of juggling games and kind of like ball catching games as warm-ups for our sessions. Another really popular warm-up for parkour sessions is hacky sack.
Mm-hmm.
Hacky sack's a great game for hip mobility.
Mm-hmm.
But anything where you're like having to catch, like reaching and grasping and orienting on objects with your eyes, super valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So the fundamental thing for me is like basically, it basically comes down to like, you could train gymnastics and track and field and certain other things, and you're going to get a lot of the value of what parkour offers, but nothing is as valuable in my opinion as parkour. Parkour is the most primal expression of the same principle that is in gymnastics, is in track and field. It's how does a human being move through the world? And then what we teach is parkour in nature, because that's where our bodies evolved. And that's a slightly different expression. But if you have a parkour in your community nearby, you can get a lot out of going and just learning whatever they're doing. As far as the fighting aspect, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, judo, American wrestling, any of the above are fairly easy to find, and they'll teach you a lot. You may want to practice some other movement arts in order to be ready to take those on. All those practices are incredibly valuable from my perspective, but they're often taught in a way that's not very, it's not very friendly to beginners, coming from a sedentary culture that haven't had that experience of rough and tumble play.
Mm-hmm.
If you want an easier entry into kind of body to body work, I recommend contact improv communities.
Yeah.
That can be a great place to start developing your kinesthetic sensitivity and your connection and your awareness of your body. I like Systema, not as a long-term solution to like self-defense and high-level movement in martial arts, but as a physical culture and a way of developing robustness in the body and the ability to tolerate movement. I think there's some really brilliant stuff in that community. Really great breath work as well. So that's another one that I think is a good resource for people. And then as far as, like I said, dance, dance is such a, like an underutilized resource for movement people.
Mm-hmm.
Dancers love dance so much that they basically like will give it away almost for free. Right?
Yeah.
Like people spend like, $1,000 to go train with a movement guy for a weekend. And like, 30% of his stuff comes from modern dance classes that you can find like 50 people in your city selling, for like $15 a class. It's such like, it's like probably the number one place where you can go for like, it's the best cost to benefit ratios for movement competency is to take on some dance classes. They're really cheap. There's tons of people who are super passionate about it, who are doing it. And yeah, there's a huge world there. Like you can go right into partner dancing. You can do contact improv. You can do modern, contemporary. If you like to do floor work, you do modern and contemporary. If you're really interested in rhythm, African or hip hop, like they're so good for your body. Ecstatic dance, like yeah, take your pick. Dance, just find some time, even if it's not all the time in your year, to like do a block of dance classes. Highly recommend. I gave you guys a resource on
number 4
sex, and then as far as like lifting and carrying things, obviously there's a huge strength and conditioning community. So you can always learn from there. And then any ball game, like traditional sports sort of get a bad rap in the movement community because they're really overused in our movement education system. And a lot of people got burned out on them early in childhood because of the professional sort of approach to sports. But all the sports are great. And they were around for like a really long time because people loved doing them. So you can get a lot out of playing baseball, basketball, hockey, football, etc. Just find some friends who want to throw the pigskin around and throw a frisbee, play ultimate, frisbee golf. Like any of that is a good addition to your movement practice.
Nice.
Now that's a lot of stuff, so it's unlikely that you're going to like be able to set out a curriculum of all of that and start doing it right away. So you want to prioritize it. And there's two ways that I would prioritize that for people. One is like, what are the kind of the things that deliver the most benefits? And then two is the things that you like the most, right? So I would like prioritize parkour over, say, soccer, because I think that it trains your body in a much more diverse way and gets a broader set of physical nutrients into your body. But I would also say that if you go play soccer and you are passionately in love with what you do and it motivates you to do everything else to support your movement practice, that's the thing to make the center of it. Like, just choose the thing that you absolutely fall in love with and then build your practice around that. So many times people are like, well, they feel like they have to earn the stuff that they like. So like, if I'm going to do parkour, or I'm going to go take this class or that class, it's like, well, I better go to the gym and get on the treadmill and get my weight down and do all this stuff. And then they never do it because they don't like doing any of those things.
God, I knew a guy who was cutting weight to get in shape to go climbing. And I was like, damn, man, you just got to go climbing. Like,
go climb, man. Like, the likelihood that you're going to ever cut the weight off increases extraordinarily when you start doing something that you care about. It's like climbing is physically active. It will help you burn calories.
Yeah.
It's not like there's something magical about running on a treadmill that helps burn calories. So you're already getting the exercise benefits as soon as you do anything physical, right? Now, it may not be the most optimal, right? Maybe there's a more refined way to get your cardio in than doing parkour. But if you're going to do parkour, if you're going to do soccer, if you're going to do tango, or even, I don't know, Zumba classes, right? Like, is it Zumba?
It's Zumba.
I think it's Zumba.
Yeah.
It's not a robot. Zumba.
Roomba. No, this is Zumba.
Zumba, right? Like, people love to hate on Zumba too, but it's like, man, that motivates people to get their asses moving. That's a damn good thing.
I'm having deja vu. I was talking to Rye Hurst the other week, and he said the same thing. And Zumba was the thing. It's like, man, if you love Zumba, go Zumba.
Yeah. There you go. Great minds.
Never
right?
tried Zumba. Yeah, great minds. Man,
I've never tried it either. So the first thing is find the things that light you up, and then build the support structures that allow you to do those things and stay healthy and stay productive and continue growing in a way that's valuable to you. I don't lift weights because I enjoy lifting weights. I mean, I don't not enjoy lifting weights. It is enjoyable for me, but it's not nearly as enjoyable as other things. But I do it because it supports those other things.
Yeah. Nice.
So that's the practical advice, I think.
So I guess the easiest way to distill that would just be to like come to an event of yours, right? So like for people who are really digging this line of thought, like where do we learn more about you? Where do we learn what you're up to?
It's a beautiful segue. Your check is in the mail. Evolvemoveplay.com is my website. We have been kind of, traditionally we've done we put a lot of our material on Facebook. We're really trying to migrate the way that we interact with people to our website and our newsletter. So if you go to the website, it'll have a pop-up and you can get on the newsletter right away. And then we're going to be trying to build out more and more resources for you so you can sort of navigate through all these different ideas effectively. So it'll be like, eventually, here's the basic architecture of the site. Here's where you can go and learn this, this, and this. That's kind of where we're going. There's already a lot of resources on the website, and it's just going to get better.
Mm-hmm.
So evolvemoveplay.com. And then my Facebook page is Rafe Kelley, Rafe Kelley Movement. And I'm on Twitter as Rafe Kelley and Instagram as Rafe Kelley. And then I also have a Evolve Move Play group on Facebook if people want to join the group.
Mm.
And then as far as workshops, I teach 2-day workshops and 7-day intensive workshops. Some of those are collaborations. Some of those are on my own. I'm teaching in Australia, so I don't know when this will go up, but I'm teaching in Australia in 11 days. So I'll be teaching a 2-day workshop in Sydney, which is going to be beautiful. There's just 2 spots left for that. And then we're going to be in we're a week-long workshop with Simon Thacker from Ancestral Movement, which is a really great, brilliant movement thinker as well, in a place called Araluan, out in the bush. That's an amazing experience. My second time doing it with Simon.
Nice.
There's something incredibly powerful about the tribal aspect of that. And working with Simon's really cool because he's very deep in ancestral living in a broader sense than just movement. He's very deep in the movement stuff, also very deep in meditation. Spent 10 years or something like that traveling China, India, and Southeast Asia learning about meditation and martial arts. And then now he's like super into all the bushcraft stuff. So they're spear throwing and fire drilling and basket weaving and plant dyeing and all this crazy stuff that we get into, and cooking underground, bush food. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Then I'll be in China for a 2-day workshop, May 12th and 13th. Then the big workshops are the summer workshops. These are my personal favorite workshops because they're the workshops that are in my home turf, right? Mm-hmm. So the places that I've built my practice. If you've been following my work and seen all the videos of basically anything, almost all my videos are shot here in the Northwest. And if there's anything cool that you've seen in the video, it's probably going to show up at the workshop. So if you think the trees are cool that we jump and fly and swing through, you're going to go to those trees. If you think the boulders look amazing that we jump around on and climb on, we're going to go to those boulders. If you want to climb through the waterfall, you're going to get a chance to climb through the waterfall. For most of your audience, the appropriate one would be an event called Return to the Source. That's the 3rd through the 10th. Those events, I just can't say enough about them because we're going to stay in a house that my dad built. My dad's architecture has been featured on The Legend of McDodge, in the New York Times, in the Seattle Times, in a book by Lloyd Kahn called Natural Boulders. Like, it's really unique, beautiful stuff. People can look up Rafe Kelley if they're interested in the architecture. Mm-hmm. So we'll be on my family property, which has been my family since the 1920s. We'll be staying in this beautiful house. We have a wood-fired sauna, cold plunges. We've got a diving board. We've got, just, it's amazing. And so you get to spend all the day moving together with other people, and then you get to have an amazing meal. We make you local, organic, grass-fed beef and local pastured pork, all the duck. We do all sorts of delicious stuff. We'll make that for you guys, and then so you have that meal around the campfire, and then people bring music and play music and hang out and tell stories and take a sauna every day. And that I think the biggest things humans crave is deep tribal connection. And there's nothing that I've ever seen that builds that, like facing fears and overcoming challenges and engaging in play with a group of other people of common kind of mindset over the course of a full day, and then digesting that over a beautiful meal under the stars around the campfire. And that brings people together in a way that has a unique power over anything that I've ever seen. And people leave that event talking about, the people that they met and the connections that they made and the experiences that they had. As like, something life-changing is a word that you'll hear a lot, which is, which is very flattering. And, so that's that one. And then for the intermediate and advanced movers, this is more from a parkour perspective. So, if you can vault and jump and climb and you're confident doing it and you're not too scared of heights, and you don't mind moving in cold water, there's an event called the Hero's Journey. which is the same basic structure, but again, we're just going to be going deeper into a lot of things around the theory of flow, the theory of how we teach dynamic systems, evolution. And that's going to be, so Return to the Source is the 3rd through the 10th. And the Hero's Journey is the 13th through the 20th of July. So 3rd through the 10th of August, 13th to 20th of July. Find those on the website. And then I'll be doing a similar event in Europe, the European Intensive, the first week of October. And you can also find that on the website. And we're going to be staying in a beautiful rewilding camp, basically in the south of Spain, surrounded by a national park. And then I'm going to go and do a week-long bushcraft and natural movement seminar with Ben McNutt from Woodsmoke in Namibia. So anyone who wants to go on a really cool trip, check that out. And then if you're in South Africa, I'll be teaching in Johannesburg, or not Johannesburg, Cape Town. That'll be my last seminar of the year. And then my apprentices will be in San Francisco and Philadelphia as well. So that's a big advertisement there. Thank you for giving me the space. But yeah, I think if you're really interested in movement and you want to understand what it means to move the way that we evolved to, and you want to get your skin in the game on movement, and really start constructing your character through it, I would love to see you guys. And 2-day events are great. 7-day events are even better.
I can only
something
imagine. Yeah,
amazing comes together with being together with the group for a long time. So yeah.
Past experience, they're phenomenal. If you're listening, just go. Come on. Awesome. They're crazy. Man. Well, Rafe, thank you. It's always fireworks in my head when you speak. And so I really appreciate you taking the time.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chandler.
Absolutely.